All right. Well, hello, everybody. It is, we are on the second half of The Horse and His Boy, chapters 9 to 15. And I just remember how much I love this book, this story. It's so good. So chapter 9 itself is entitled Across the Desert. So we'll remember that we kind of had Shasta overhearing the plans of the Narnians to escape. We overhear the plans of Rabadash and the Tisroc to pursue and try and win Anvard, and from there, at some point, assail Narnia itself. And so now we come to chapter 9, and we have Aravis with her friend Lasaraline just freaking out after what they have overheard, largely because if they're caught, they're under death sentence. So there was an interesting kind of comment that Lasaraline says about the Tisroc, where she says, surely such a great man must be right. Somebody as great as the Tisroc. So despite the fact that they hear these plans and that there's duplicity going on the part of the Tisroc, the citizen says, well, surely it must be right if he does it. So I just thought it would be good to talk about that dynamic, what Lewis is bringing forward. And again, this is post World War II. So there's some conversation about that, right? Like there were people in Germany that went along with Hitler, a lot of people in Germany that went along with Hitler, despite the horrors of World War II. Anything you want to say about that, or? The next thing that stood out to me was Aravis has an interaction with the groom that had been ordered to take the two horses out past the city gates. What did you think of that interaction? How does it show some growth in her character? Where do you think that growth might come from? Just in case you're looking for it. But before she had reached them, she saw Bree and Quinn and the groom. You can go back to your mistress now, said Aravis, quite forgetting that he couldn't until the city gates opened next morning. Here's money for your pains.
It goes back to how she treated her slave to
Right.
begin with. She didn't really care. And now she's starting to care about the people around her.
Right.
Um,
And where do you think that comes from in this adventure?
I think it comes from the friendship with Shasta.
Mhm.
And, you know, he's kind of like, well, why aren't you caring about these people? And I think it speaks to all of us too, where, you know, it's not just what we say, but it's kind of what we do as well with our neighbors. It's not just a matter of, being pleasant to them. It's, if you're gonna walk the walk, you should, or if you're gonna talk the talk, you should walk the walk,
Right.
too,
Yeah, yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
So maybe she's gained some positive perspective of those who might be considered lower than her station. And then it seems to me there's also a bit of a foil with her friend that she's been staying with. She's now learned this is not the character that she wants to have, right?
Yeah.
And so she's kind of had this dual taste, distaste of kind of the world that she's leaving, taste of the potential world that she's going to. Yeah, we're seeing some growth and development.
I think sometimes when you don't really know any different
Mhm.
either, like if you've never
Yes.
been witnessed or modeled something different, then you think this is all there is.
Right,
And all of a sudden it's a sweeter taste
yes.
to kind of go, life looks a little bit different.
And sometimes it's so in the water that we don't even
Yeah,
see it, right?
yeah.
'Cause, again, worldview is the lenses that we look through, not the things that we look at. So
Mhm.
there's an assumption of kind of this aristocracy being
Mhm.
some people better than other people. Then they become just invisible and not worth our consideration because they have nothing to offer us.
Change up the perspective a little bit.
Yeah, so she's starting to have horse reference here. Her blinders taken off as she travels with the horses. And this little poor boy. Well, and then there's this conversation about the need to go out once. And some of them just want to take right off. Yeah. And so, again, what is it that Lewis is trying to convey here to us as they have this discussion about what it's going to be like to cross the desert?
I wish I hadn't read the book so long ago, but I would think that crossing the desert would be a daunting prospect and not something you should just rush into without some kind of preparation.
Right. So there's a crisis, and so Erva says we need to go at once because Rabidash has said he's going to leave at once. And Bree says that's how humans talk, but you don't get a company of 200 horsemen watered and victualated and armed and saddled and started all in a minute. And so the thing that kind of caught my attention again, if we're thinking about Lewis contributing to this body of literature that is the right kind of stories, one of the things I think that he's talking about is the need for reason, particularly in times of crisis, right? Often the crisis can tempt us to just go rushing off. But at this point in the story, they don't even know the direction yet. So they have to have some conversation, and it's kind of Bree's cool head that wins the day and enables them to take the proper steps. And so, for my kids, my girls, I've spent their lifetime saying, "What's the first thing we do in a crisis?" And they will chime back to me now, remain calm. Because the second you start freaking out, you're not thinking anymore. So I think Lewis is trying to communicate some of that.
Mhm.
But then, yeah, there's also some checking of the literature as well, because Bree goes on to say now, all this stuff about horses running a day and a night, like that's how
Mhm.
you'll kill a horse. So we're not doing that.
Yeah.
We're gonna mix it up and we're gonna approach it this way. So again, wisdom is there. Then we have this journey through the desert, and I was really taken with the way that Lewis describes it. Because he doesn't just describe scenery or that kind of thing. Like all good writers, he's trying to help you as the reader or us as the reader to experience what it is. And so you'll notice the very light and happy and easygoing kind of language as they start off the journey, and Shasta just sees it and the sand is just glittering like diamonds, and it's all lovely, kind of picturesque. But then as it goes on, he starts to plod a little bit in his writing. The horse's hooves going, bippity boppity bip, just, and it's kind of drawn out. And you think, man, he could have said this a lot quicker, but that's the point, right? And so he is communicating this journey through the desert and this arc of the experience of going through the desert, where it starts off kind of adventures, right? Like, woohoo, we're going and we're in a race and we're going to save the day. And it's, we've got our purpose, our mission, our plan, and we start to go. And now it's kind of difficult. So what is it that Lewis is communicating to his readers with this journey of the desert? Or maybe I should say, what does it communicate to you, if anything? Now, Bob, you're muted, so if that was for the whole class, we didn't get it. No, just comment to Karen. Okay.
I think like this idea was absolutely dead, like something in a dead world.
Mhm.
And he was tired and cold and like all the discomfort
Yeah, yeah,
of,
yeah.
of the journey, right?
Yes.
I was going to say we all have ebbs and flow in our life journey where, yeah, we're headed off, big excitement, blah, 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 all this. And then all of a sudden, it goes downhill or something happens and you start to waver. That's why it's good to read God's word and be encouraged with his word. When you're reading the Psalms and it says, praise the Lord, and then all this crap has happened, praise the Lord. So Psalms is good to stay on course for life.
And so what might Lewis be saying to us in that kind of a context?
Well, I think stay the course. They had a plan, got to stay the course. It's difficult. It wasn't here's your ticket, it's an easy ride. It was a hard ride. Life is hard too. Living in this world's hard. So he could be drawing parallels to the life circumstances that the world presents.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think this is about perseverance, and about not going by feeling. If you read his collection of letters, he talks about it, and I'm not sure, it might be in Screwtape Letters, that he talks about the peaks and valleys of the faith, and that in the beginning of our faith, God gives us this kind of almost a glory, or we're untouchable, and it's just easy. We can just sail through. But then there comes a time when God seems to withdraw that. And at times it can almost feel like God is missing from the picture. And we're still called to keep being faithful and keep going forward, right? So yeah, I think you're right, Bob. I think there's a parallel between the life of faith and this calling, and this journey through the desert. Again, the desert is a place where God meets us. The desert is the place where we are refined and tested, right,
Mhm.
biblically. Sorry,
think-
Bob.
I think Lewis brought that out in the letters to Malcolm.
Okay,
Yeah, I think when he was
Bob read ahead.
He did.
talking well, I have to, because I'm a slow reader.
So it's okay. Give us what you got.
I started last winter reading. Anyway,
Yeah,
I like how he says at one point, then a streak of red. It was the morning at last,
yes,
but there's still no birds singing
yes.
and they were still walking and he was colder than ever. It was
Yeah.
like this moment of like hope on the horizon,
Right.
but
Yeah,
I
yeah.
still got to keep persevering
That's
and
right.
keep going. And
Yeah.
then suddenly the sun rose and
Yes.
everything changed in a moment. And I think,
Yes.
oh, how often, like you're trudging through a season in life and you're like, how much longer do we have to keep doing this? And there'll be a moment of hope. And I always think of it as these, I kind of have the imagery of these white picnic blankets
Okay.
in a dark valley,
Okay.
where even when you're in the dark valley, God will lay these white picnic blankets for just a moment where you can stand and just have peace and comfort, but then you still have to keep going.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And, but then before you know it, you're like, oh, geez.
Very Psalm 23.
Yeah, it is, but
Yes,
that's always
yeah,
been
yeah.
the dream or the imagery in
good.
my mind. But
That's good.
yeah.
Thank you. Well, and then we have this oasis. They find it. Saved. This moment of desperation and joy. But then, of course, they fall asleep and they don't mean to. So some of you have read Pilgrim's Progress, some with me in the History of Christianity course. Did it remind you of that at all? Pilgrim's Progress? Well, I didn't look it up myself, but I believe there are moments where Pilgrim has gone off course or fallen asleep as part of the journey. And I think Lewis is intentionally echoing that, right? They're within sight of their goal and they become slack. And now part of that, of course, is the narrative. We need some crisis, right? In order to make a good story, you have to have climax and anticlimax. You have to have some crisis and place to grow and that kind of thing. It can't be just a perfect story or else we wouldn't want to read it. But I think the other part of that again is Lewis creating some parallels, doing some allegorical work. You know, the warning, kind of the tortoise and the hare, the hare falls asleep because he's got this on lock. We have kind of the same sort of perspective. Well, we're so far ahead, we took the shorter route, right? And then there's that moment, well, nobody actually said this was shorter. But
I think too that it's human nature to when we start getting close to a goal sometimes, and even though it was tough and we went through all that, oh, we're almost there, and we do slack off and we don't have the same kind of focus,
right,
and that's when you got to really dig deep and
right. Yeah, somehow
turn to God.
loses the urgency, and then it's going to require discipline at that moment. In some ways it's easy when it's urgent. The start of this journey, they're excited, it's adventure, they're fresh, they've rested, they've eaten well, they've slept. So they're in good form for the taking off on this journey. And then it moves into survival. We just got to survive this journey, right? We got to hopefully find this oasis, and they're gasping, they're dry, they stagger in, they fall into this water, and, probably just thank their lucky stars that they have this relief. But with that relief comes can they get up? Can they go again? Can they find that same urgency? And what is it going to take? Well, they're not fresh anymore. They're wiped. They're exhausted. And even, that mistake of allowing themselves to rest enough to fall asleep, we can forgive them that, but it's this waking up and, some Quinn saying, shouldn't we go? Didn't we come for this? And Bree, I don't know what's happening with Bree in the start, right? Seem to have again some vanity, some pride going on here, and almost some self-conceit, right? Somehow he is no longer thinking about the goal, the mission. It's really just about what he needs in this moment. Which we could probably all resonate with, right? Well,
it does feel a lot very similar to today's times, right?
Right.
Like that immediate gratification,
mm,
not having to like persevere, wait for it,
yes.
kind of work longer for it. I don't know.
Well, even the category of duty
Yeah.
is a very old, and once upon a time you could kind of say to somebody, it is your duty, and it's good to do your duty. And once you do your duty, think about Anna Green Gables context, you'll find that it's a friend and it's something that is joyful, and it's a good kind of thing. Well, that is not a category these days, for
No.
sure.
No, for sure
People
not. And
wanna
it
be
is quite
inspired.
selfish. Like not selfish, but very, maybe it is. Like, what do I need?
Yes.
It's about
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, maybe self-centered, without the label or kind of a derogatory statement about it, but it is. I mean, we have become the center of our own universe. Everybody has become their own highest authority, their own king and queen, and therefore it's on everybody else to make me happy, right? If there's a pursuit of happiness as the end of life, then who is responsible for providing that for me is the big question. All right, so then we go into chapter 10, and we have the Hermit of the Southern March. And there's so many things here, but one of the first things that really stands out to me that Lewis says is he points out that there is a difference between they were giving it all they could and they thought they were giving it all they could. They're not the same thing. And this moment of urgency, that the horses especially honestly think that they are giving everything that they can, but as a narrator, as from the God's eye view, he says it's actually not true. So what is Lewis trying to communicate to us here? Maybe the conversation we just had gives that some context. Of course, the horses find out that they do have more in the tank as soon as there's a lion in pursuit behind them.
If you were a sports guy, I would say it's like getting your second wind. And
Right.
all of a sudden you're sailing again.
Yeah.
So
So
that
mentally, what do you have to do to get to the second wind place? Because I remember running and thinking this is awful, and people would say, just keep going, you'll have your second wind. So what's the process to get there?
I don't know. You have to tell me. Did you ever get your second wind?
No, I hated running.
You went downhill. It's
They
like-
always tried to make it sound like a pride thing, and I didn't care what they thought of me.
I think the thing is you surprise yourself when you do push yourself that you can do it. There's an element of, wow, I did that. I made it through.
Okay, so we have more capacity,
Right.
but Lewis is saying something a little more than that, because what he's describing is the difference between the idea that I think I'm giving it all that I've got and actually giving it all that I got. So that's what I kind of want to explore is, what's that intersection?
I think it's the why, like if your why changes for having to speed things up, like
Okay.
if it's survival,
Yes.
oh, well, all of a sudden your why is gonna change and you're gonna go a little faster.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
That's what
Yeah,
I'm
yeah, yeah.
gleaning from that is.
Certainly when there's a lion on your
Yep.
tail, you got a new why.
You do. You find another gear.
For myself, I was thinking Lewis is helping us see or understand not only is there self-conceit, but there's self-deceit. Because really we are trying to convince others, this is all I've got, this is as much as I can do, but really that sort of thing is more a battle with ourselves, right?
Mhm.
I don't have anything, I can't do this. It's almost that self-defeating kind of thinking. And I think Lewis wants to say, that's actually not the truth about ourselves.
Mm.
We want to let ourselves off easy. We want others to also let us off. We want to do some self-justification, to say, well, give it as, give it all you got kind of thing. And then just, yeah, whatever we give is fine. I think Lewis wants us, and I think our spiritual parents tell us that we are liars. And the people that we lie to is ourselves most, right?
Mhm.
And if we are going to see transformation and the Christ life established, and we have to put off the old self, and that involves first admitting the lie to ourselves. That makes sense.
It does, because I think about like, I started CrossFit a couple of years ago. And so it was very comfortable to do the things that I knew I could do.
Right.
And then the coach would always push you just a little bit to get you. And then when you look over the course of the year, you think, well, I started here and I never thought I'd be doing
Right.
this.
Right.
And it was only because they'd say, well, do you got one more?
Yes.
Do you got two more?
Yes.
And partly pride, you're like, yeah, I can,
Yeah.
like, I'll do
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
Right. But would I have done it if they hadn't pushed me? Maybe not.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or other people you notice and you go spur yourself on after a while.
Right.
But I can see how it's it's a neat place to be when you're finally here.
Right.
But I would never have gotten there. At
Right.
first I hadn't even started
Right. Right.
or allowed others to push you to that uncomfortable place.
Right.
Like I think even like on the weekend with the ladies retreat, not that I did this, but in the summer I went up the high ropes,
Right.
right? And it was my husband who is the coach in that case because I'm
Right.
terrified of heights. And
Okay.
Bob, you were there that day, I think, when I went up on the ropes, and it was terrifying, but I did it.
Yes.
And when I came down, Ben said, will you do that again? I said, yes, next time when I do it. So I said, when?
Yeah.
I'm going to look out.
Yeah.
Because this time I could just like, I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah.
gonna hang on right here.
Hold on.
And just like, oh.
Yeah.
But next time I want to look out and see the
Yeah.
lake. So you can kind of see that progression of what is the next thing.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
think that death to self, who do we have in our corner? Who do we put in our corner or encourage or welcome in to
Mhm.
push us
Mhm.
to that next
Yeah.
spot? Not be comfy.
And I think there's applications right through our life, right? I mean, think about arguments with a spouse or friend. where you think I've given as much as I can give in this. I can't do any more. Yard work. Yeah. Sorry. Too.
Another one of Dave's favorite
Yeah.
activities.
Yeah. Well, that was a good discussion. Shasta responds to the lion. What does this tell us about Shasta's developing character as we've gotten to know him? Now it's stupid. Sees the lion is after Erebus and Wynn. He can't get Bree to stop and go back to help. So he just tumbles off the horse, almost wins himself, gets up, and then without any sort of a plan or a weapon, just yells at the lion to stop. Fortunately for him, this lion does a somersault and takes off. But Shasta does this. Does this tell us about Shasta now?
He's no more a little boy. He's a big boy now.
Okay.
Very courageous.
Okay.
Did a bold thing because he cared, and for no other reason. He didn't have any weapons. He didn't have anything. He didn't, but he knew he wanted to save his friend.
Right.
And he's
Pretty
not
cool.
thinking about himself anymore.
Right.
He's thinking about the other people, and that they need help, and he's the only one who can help them.
That seems to be a key thing in a book that just keeps coming back to pride and vanity over and over and over again. He stops thinking about himself. Some ways he just stops thinking.
Mhm.
But yeah, he starts to look outward. He's not wholly cured, as we'll see a little later, but it's the beginning. It's good.
Mhm.
And then Lewis says, they get to the hermitage. They're safe from the lion. Erebus has been wounded. And the hermit, who seems to be a mix of wizard, St. Francis of Assisi, and some sort of St. Anthony. Anyways, somehow knows everything that's going on, knows what needs to happen next, knows that Shasta is the only hope for their salvation, and so sends him to run, always run straight ahead until you find King Loon. And Lewis says Shasta didn't know at that point that usually the reward for doing a good deed is that you get to do another harder, better one. What did you think of that? Is that true?
Yes,
Who-
it is true.
Who just shouted yes?
Me.
Karen Cardinal. Well,
Although-
unpack it a little bit for us.
My boss always told me, he says, the more you can get done in a day just means we pile on more work. And so that's how it works.
Okay, now did you pile on more work? Seems to be a little different than a bigger and better work. Did you feel like the pile on of work was bigger and better?
No, I don't know about that.
So I think you've got some of the idea, but maybe it's missing a little bit of Lewis's idea.
I guess.
I thought it was interesting that Shasta didn't do a negotiation or, well, should I'm tired, like why should I go? He just went. He trusted the spirit. Go. If you go this way, you're going to get there in time. Maybe.
Yeah. So we've got some sense of duty at work in Shasta for sure.
I wondered if the hermit was Lewis possibly trying to pull the Holy Spirit into this?
Certainly could be, although There's no connection between the hermit and Aslan. Whereas we saw in the last part one last week that the cat at the tombs seemed to be more of a presence and was connected to the lion, which we found out in this half.
Okay.
So I'm not going to say no. I would say that the hermit is certainly a divine grace channel, seems to have, he seems more to me, again, like an Elijah, Elisha prophetic character. Maybe a John the Baptist kind of character, more than a member of the Godhead.
Okay.
It seems like he's sort of affirming, in a sense, Shasta and encouraging him to go. And I mean, Shasta has gained new confidence, new skills, new tools, if you will, to do the next things that he doesn't know what the future holds, right? And he's going to step in anyway.
Right.
And I think of what Karen said about, getting piled on more work. Sometimes it is, yeah, you do get given more responsibilities, but if someone recognizes that you're able,
Yes.
they want to, give you the opportunity to grow your skill level.
Yes.
Do you sit and stay at that? Maybe it's then moving on into
Yes.
leadership or whatever the next step is.
Yeah.
That might be harder yet.
Yeah.
I don't know, that's what I kind of feel.
This is all good. So the hermit says he's been all over the place and he has never encountered anything that's known as luck. So if luck is not at play here in this story, what is happening?
Well, I mean, I've read the whole book, so maybe I'm giving something away, but I think Aslan is in control. God is in control, and nothing is happening or has happened that isn't intended to happen.
Hmm.
And just to go backwards for a second with Shasta is, I think when he tumbled off the horse and so on, and now is prepared to run and find King Loon, I think it goes back to when they found him in that city and the people were nice to him. Susan and Peter, and they were nice to him and treated him well, even though, they thought he was the prince. But I think it touched him. And I think for him, it's all mixed up with, I really want to help these people.
Okay, good. Good. So yeah, I think you're right that Lewis is pointing out that these are not just coincidental circumstances. One, within the story itself, we know that there is a mind, a will at work, although it's not yet visible at this point in the story. And we have read to the end of this book. This is part 2. So we do know the ending at this point. We also know from the narrative, there's an author here, right? This is an orderly account. Things are happening the way that they are supposed to happen. And yes, this is not just luck that's going on. And of course, that world is a reflection of this world. So the reminder that even though things seem kind of coincidental, some things seem lucky and some don't, that may not be a category that's actually in play in our experience. So Bree wants to go back to Colorman. What's going on with Bree? He won't talk. He's sulking in a corner.
Was he embarrassed? Like, that's what I remember from reading the story. I think that
Yeah.
his pride kind of got in the way and
Do you remember
was-
what it was pride over?
he felt, I don't remember exactly, but I think I remember it being like Shasta went and did something good and I forget her name now.
Aravis,
Aravis
yeah.
recognized that
Right,
and like said something to Shasta, but Bree wasn't a part of that conversation. I think
Right.
that made him sort of jealous
right.
almost and prideful that he wasn't part of like the whatever good deed.
Yes, yes. So Bree has an image of himself that we get to explore a little later. How Bree became a wiser horse. Um, he's a war horse. He's a talking horse, and so again, there's a sense of status and position. We learn later, he's been surrounded by dumb animals, and so he's exceptional in that world. And yet, at the moment of crisis, when things were hot, he could not master himself, could not force himself to go back and face danger. And that, if you are defined as a war horse and facing danger, particularly in a military sense, is what you are for. And so it's kind of like men who define themselves by their work, and then for some reason, maybe it's retirement, maybe an accident or something, they can't do that work, and they, who am I then, kind of thing, right? And if I am a coward, because that would be the language for it, he acted cowardly, did not stop, did not master his fear, or even in his fear, pursue helping a friend. Where Shasta, and as Bree says, he's had no upbringing. He's had no good nurturing. He's had no example. Like there's nothing in Shasta that should have made Shasta do what he did. And there's everything in Bree that should have made Bree do what Shasta did. Bree couldn't bring himself to do it, and Shasta somehow did it. And so, yes, there's this kind of comparison. And as a result, he just can't face going into Narnia. So again, we have this sense of pride, vanity. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, it makes me think of the scripture that I don't know where it is, but it says, if you try to save your life, you're going to lose your life.
Right,
Because like Bree had said, all I could do is save my own wretched skin.
right.
He was just so worried about, he was so frightened, and I got to get away.
Yes,
And God's word tells us, no, if we're trying to save our life, doing everything to try to save it, you're going to lose your life.
right.
I think, to me, that drew a parallel right away to that. Not
Good.
about seeking our own good, it's the seeking the good of others.
Right. Which, and we talked a little bit about this in Mere Christianity, right? There's the herd instinct, and somebody is in danger, and there is the instinct to help, and there is the instinct to protect yourself, and then there's the thing that distinguishes that between the two, right? That says we should minimize the desire to flee and protect ourselves, and we should maximize the urge to go and help. And so again, we're into the territory of virtue here. Although this is good for Bree ultimately, because it is the beginning of dealing with his character. And so perhaps even these moments that we don't quite live up to the ideal about ourselves can be received as a gift too, because they may actually help us to become better who we are.
I think it was a gift that the hermit was there to
Mhm.
help him puzzle through that
Yeah,
so he could learn from it.
right,
I think otherwise sometimes we can just sit in it
right,
versus having somebody safe who will call you out and go,
right.
well, actually.
Yes, yes. And so, yeah, that's the last word of the chapter is the hermit says to Bree, as long as you know that you're not special, then you'll be a very good chap.
Mhm.
good horse. So biblically, that is having a right estimation of ourselves. Humility. And humility is not pretending that we are lower than we are, like I'm a worm in the dirt. Humility is standing up to our full height and then looking to God and realizing how much more He is than we are. And that puts us into perspective. And that's the only person that we're to compare ourselves with, right? Certainly not Shasta. Although there are moments like this when seeing the virtue that we should have in somebody else is a wake-up call. And again, is a gift, part of that transformation that needs to happen. Well, we come to chapter 11, the unwelcome fellow traveler. Isn't that an interesting title? The unwelcome fellow traveler. I'm going to skip my first question, which was, what do you think the connection is between mounting a horse and having noble blood? I think it's interesting. So Shasta does his thing. He finds King Loon in the party. He gets separated because he's on a non-talking horse and he has never learned to actually direct a horse. He's never had to kind of be the will or the mind in that relationship. And so he is unprepared in this moment. But then he begins to have this time of self-pity. Woe was me. And there's almost a list. So for me, it's page 127 where he says, I do think that I must be the most unfortunate boy that ever lived in the whole world. Everything goes right for everyone except me. Those Narnian lords and ladies got safe away from Tashbaan. I was left behind. Erebus and Bree and Hwyn are all as snug as anything with that old hermit. Of course, I was the one who was sent on. King Loon and his people must have got safely into the castle and shut the gates long before Rapidash arrived, but I get left out. And being very tired and having nothing inside him, he felt so sorry for himself that the tears rolled down his cheeks. Why is it at this moment that the thing, this something, appears?
Is it related to like his upbringing of like when like obviously when he's a kid he wasn't really treated like a kid, he just kind of treated like a slave. Is he starting to feel back in that trap of like everybody around me has something going for them except for me?
Oh, I certainly think that would be a big part of his experience of that self-pity. I think he's probably been fairly trained to look at his circumstances negatively and feel like the victim. He's been the victim quite a bit. And the things that he says are not untrue.
No.
So there is something in what he's saying. It was at this moment when he's reflecting and thinking these things that this presence appears next to him, startling him, almost unwelcome to begin with. Chapter title. So I'm just, is there a connection between where he's at? Norma, what do you got?
you know, I associate it with, I mean, not that I dwell on that, but you know, I've been through quite a bit in my life. And, you know, it's when you are at your lowest point, somebody coming along and giving you friendly advice, or even, you know, I guess that's where I found God the most, is at my low points,
Right.
right? And so I really resonated with that whole, like, yeah, you can get down on yourself and that, and just know that when you get surrounded by the love of God and get into His Word and stuff, and it's like, even I think of the poem Footprints.
Yeah.
We don't always know that God is there walking beside us, and to me, that is kind of what he's describing, is that, you know, Shasta at this point doesn't really know who it is until he reveals himself
Mhm.
to be
Mhm.
who he is. And, you know, because it's not, I mean, it was scary at first, but it was kind of like a calming presence
Right. Right.
after a while.
So it actually reminded me of what Lewis says at the beginning of Mere Christianity, when he says all we can really say at this point is that there's some mind behind creation, something. We can't talk about it as being good or bad, good or evil. We have no idea about it. It could be absolute good, but that may not go in our favor
Yeah.
since we're not. And the need for more data, right? And yeah, initially there's this presence, and it's not, who knows what it is?
Mhm.
There's neither, it's kind of like Schrodinger's cat. If you're a Big Bang fan, you know,
Mhm.
cat could be alive or dead. You know, this could be a good thing or a bad thing here.
I think again, there's so many parallels to life and God's presence.
Mhm.
That's why I enjoy us doing this book study. It's a story, but it's a story that Lewis wants to bring us into, and that's the discussions I really value. Is for sure he was afraid of the voice, and then he was very calmed by the voice.
Mhm.
You know, where do we find God the most powerful? Definitely when we're at our lowest. When we're up high and we're sailing, everything's going chickadee boo. We think everything's cool because we think we can do it. And then when we hit the low, we realize I can't do it. And then we start crying out and calling out, and God is always there. And the more we get to know that God is always there, we have less of those ups and downs.
Mm.
That's what I feel. But it's a journey. And just like Shasta had to first experience that, then you got it. Then you know what you have. That's the power of God. And I think Lewis is trying to pull the power of God, how powerful he is. This line is massive and strong and all these things. He wasn't just a little pussycat. He was all powerful. That's who God is. So.
I like how Bob said that, because in here when it said that he wanted to escape, right? He wanted to run.
Mhm.
And then at last he could bear it no longer. Like he knew how big and deep and wide this creature was,
Mm.
right? And
Mhm.
not knowing whether he should be scared or right. Then finally just in a whisper, like, who are you? Like in our desperation,
Mhm.
it's almost like God showing up. Like everybody has said, not initially as your savior. He needs you to acknowledge that he is this big,
Mhm,
deep presence
mhm.
that's right beside you. And I appreciated that piece of it. And then later on, when he goes into, like, I was there
Mhm.
in all of these moments.
I thought that it was interesting that the response to the question, who are you, is one who has waited long for you to speak.
To acknowledge, to like feel his presence. I mean, all the way along, it's not until you're right there and you can go, can actually feel how big you are and how little I am.
The question was, Shasta said, "Who are you?" The voice said, "Myself."
Mhm.
Just like, who are you? I am who I am. When Moses had to, "Well, who I am," just tell him I am. So I think Lewis was trying to pull that together again. You don't have to have, this is the King of Glory, and who is it? I'm myself, or I am.
Yes, yeah, that is a bit ahead. It's in the same chapter. You're right. He does do that. Initially, though, the first response to the question, who are you, is one who has waited long for you to speak.
Mm.
And I thought that was important too, right? Because while we have the theme of nothing is happening by luck or by accident, there's also, and we should note too, Shasta starts off by saying, I must be the most unfortunate person. Fortune, right? Luck. If that doesn't exist, then can he be? But anyways, but in this world where things are being directed, at the same time, there is this waiting, this invitation, the ability to be hidden, to ignore that thing, that presence. I mean, this presence has been a part of Shasta's entire story, to some degree hidden from him, but it would also seem like Shasta had the capacity to some degree to have responded to this presence that was there. Because that presence has been waiting a long time for you to speak. I think that's a really neat, we talked, Bob, you talked about the power, this powerful, all-powerful God, and yet he's the lion and the lamb that was slain, right? He exercises that power through weakness, through vulnerability. And I think this sense of waiting and the contentedness to wait for as long as it takes. I'll be with you. When you're ready to turn to me. I think that's something.
And to say, tell me your sorrows.
Yes. Yeah. Not quit your whining.
Yeah.
Not what's your problem. Not here's what's really the true story about your life. Initially, just share. In pastoral ministry, we would call that being the non-anxious presence of Christ. Sit with somebody who is dying. You don't have to say anything. You're just there being the non-anxious presence of Christ. You be peaceful and you convey that peace. The warm breath, second time through, on his hand and face. That remind you of anything biblically? Think Gospel of John. In John, the post-resurrection Jesus meets his disciples on the Sea of Galilee again. He's cooking some breakfast for them.
Right.
And he breathes on them. Receive the Holy Spirit. And it's this transformative moment. It's not as full-fledged in this account, but it does bring peace. It does establish some calm. And in the second instance, it demonstrates that I am not a ghost.
Mhm.
Um,
You're reassured
yeah.
by the breath.
And as a result, he is enabled to share his sorrows with the large voice. I do not call you unfortunate. And so this is probably the greatest thing. He tells Shasta his story. And it's a much different story than what Shasta has been telling himself. Much different story than what Shasta believed himself.
Mm.
And I wonder if this is in some ways an eschatological picture, or maybe it's just an unpacking of what happens as God meets us in our life here and now. And those two things are not separated, but the telling of our story from a different perspective. We're gonna read last the book Till We Have Faces. Oh, it's my favorite. That's why it's saved for last. But it is a character who has an accusation against the gods. And she's been writing it for years and years and years. And suddenly, swiftly, there comes this moment where she's brought before the gods to read her book. She realizes as she's flipping through the pages and reading it, that it's about the size of a postage stamp. She's just saying the same thing over and over again. And she says, how can we face the gods until we have faces?
Mm.
I think there's something similar going on here. Shasta needs to have a face. And in some ways, this is the giving it to him. His story is retold, and this is part of that transformation that's going on. And I think, again, that's key. That's at the heart of our discipleship. Having Christ tell us our story, unpacking, debunking, reframing the story, not in the context of luck or random circumstance, but in the context of his purpose, the context of his love. It's a very different story as a result.
Mhm. There was a class that Pastor Steve did, Vantage Point.
Yes.
And in there, there's an exercise where you write down everything that you, like the different points that you've gone through. And then you go back and you take another look at it and ask yourself, where was God
Mhm.
in this story? And it's a very good exercise to
Mhm.
help you to realize that, God is with us even when we don't realize that he's there.
Mhm.
Right. Yes. That's great. So just in case you couldn't hear it, the exercise was to write down kind of crisis or difficult moments from your history, and then at some point go back, reread it, and begin asking the question, where was God in relationship to those things, as a means to open up and see God's part in your story. Why doesn't the lion tell Shasta about its reasons for wounding Erebus?
It's not his story.
So what does that mean? Unpack that a little bit. Because yes, I mean, technically that's the answer is, but
Yeah, I was just reading that thinking like he asks, then was it you who wounded Erebus? Yes, it was I. But for what? And I'm telling you the story, not hers. I tell no one any story but his own. I think that's keeping your eye on your relationship with the Lord and his impact your story, because you
Mhm.
don't know all of the perspectives of the other person's story, all the reasons why.
Mhm.
I think that's
Mhm.
really important.
It
And
made me,
to also know, like, there, you don't get to know.
Mhm.
made me think of the story too, or the account that was given to us by the disciples that, that, well, John wasn't gonna, he was gonna live forever,
Right.
What did Jesus say? It's just, well, what is that for you? So
Yeah,
it's not,
another John
like,
reference.
it's none of your business what I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And,
it's that.
and that actually, just to follow that through, Bob, because he looks at the beloved disciple, Peter, and says, well, Lord, what about this one? And he says, I'm telling you your story. You don't worry about him.
Yep.
You follow me.
Mm.
So somehow, I think it's an innocent question. I
Mhm.
think we try and understand the world that we are surrounded in. When we see things happen to other people, it's natural to ask what's going on, why would God allow this, what is happening.
Mhm.
And I think there's a proper place for that. But at the end of the day, that can also become a distraction. It can be an excuse. It can keep us from doing and being what we are called to do and be.
Mhm. And I think as we've talked about, like Shasta stepping in and taking the chances that he has, that's where he is on
Yeah.
this continuum. We have no idea where each person is. So when you
Yes.
see certain, like I think of certain families that we know and their stories seem really hard, but that's part of their testimony.
Yes.
And I don't know, like, no, if I had to step in, I don't think I could.
Yes.
But where have they been on that journey
Yes.
of trusting God's faithfulness and just leaning into him? I don't know if I could do the same, and that's why he doesn't give me that story,
Mhm.
which I think, and I know a term that we often say at home is a comparison steals joy,
Mhm.
right? And in a sense, really, like, not that I would want their story, because I don't think I could, and I'm stealing their joy
Right.
in what they are experiencing through God's faithfulness. I don't get to take that and own
Mhm.
that because it's not mine.
Good. So we talked about the threefold myself. I think again, I think Bob, you were dead on. I was hearing the same thing. I am that I am as the divine name in Exodus 3:14. I think it was threefold because Lewis is triune in his faith. Um, I think we'll leave chapter 11 for now. Chapter 12 is Shasta in Narnia. Um, and there's this interesting moment at the beginning of that chapter when he sees the lion's print, having thought that it was a dream because of the almost miraculous way the lion fades into the mist, and the mist itself disappears. But he sees this footprint or pad print, paw print, and suddenly it fills up with water, and he takes a very long drink. What's happening here? What is Lewis doing?
Water of life.
Say it again.
The water of life.
Water of life.
Yeah.
It
Right.
reminds me of the woman at the well.
Woman at the
The
well.
living water.
Right.
Mhm.
Living water. I think these are all appropriate resonances that we're hearing.
It really resonated with me because the Sunday I gave my heart to the Lord, the next day when I woke up, that was the first thing I questioned was, is it real? What I went through, is it real?
Mm,
And yes, it was.
mm.
I felt the Lord's peace on me, and boof, away I went. But that was my first question. I wonder if it was real. So, I wonder if it was a dream. I think we have those questions. the initial seed that's there, well, is it real? Is it real? Yes, it is real. Yes. And who gave me that assurance? It was the Holy Spirit. Before I even knew the Holy Spirit, he gave me the presence that yes. And then you learn all these things as we as we grow. But the first question was, I wonder if it's real. Is it a dream?
Mhm. Yeah.
So that's my story. You know,
That's great.
everyone's
Thank
gonna
you.
have their own story. They're going to say, well, was God present there? Was he really there? Yeah, he was there. Yeah. You know, whatever crisis you could be going through, you could get really deep and dark, and then you can wake up to the fact, well, is it real? Yeah, it is real. Yeah, he's there. There's evidence. There's the paw print. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Bob.
I like the line, the country which he was looking at was absolutely new to him.
Mhm.
And same as the woman at the well, I think about that, like that excitement of like, I gotta tell people, like, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
like just it, everything kind of looks new, similar to what Bob described.
yes. And there's another sunrise, hey? I like the
Mhm.
sunrise earlier.
Tina,
So
did you watch The Chosen? Have you watched The Chosen?
I have not.
Well, I was asking Tina because when she said that, I picture her, the excitement and jumping and
Yes,
running. Yay! You know?
yes, I love that scene. It's my favorite one in The Chosen, just thinking about how perfect it was, the timing
Yeah.
for Jesus to meet her at the well at that time. She had to do all the things that she experienced in order to meet her there.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
So, we now have animals, some waking up, some just getting ready to go to bed, talking animals. And Shasta communicates the news. And the reaction is less than urgent. So, what do you think Lewis is trying to, in addition to just his story, but what's he trying to communicate, or what were you, anything that you drew out of that lack of urgency? I'll share a little bit for myself. Seems to me that there is, Lewis is speaking into his Christendom kind of context. Narnia is at peace, it's in its golden age. There's the winter is long past, the enchantress has been taken care of. The good government of the Pippensee's children has been in place. And so there is kind of a lackadaisical perspective that I think Lewis wants to speak into with a Christendom, a country that senses that it's gotten things right. It's the epitome of culture, all that kind of stuff. And again, Germany was the cultural seat when World War II broke out. Germany was a quote unquote Christian country. And so, these animals have this idea that evil is so far away. And the reality is, it is not as far as they think. Not even Calorman is as far as they think, not thousands of miles away. It's much closer than that. And it's coming on your door, and I'm telling you, it has arrived. Yet they're having conversation. Then we have this moment when the Narnians come in response to the stag's warning, and they connect with Shasta. And there is King Edmund gives Prince Corin a good tongue lashing because Prince Corin has knocked down this dwarf. Then we kind of get the backstory that it's the dwarf's responsibility to ensure that Prince Corin does not join the fight that is to come at Anvard. And Prince Corin resorts to what he's good at, boxing, boxes the dwarf down. So my question is, why does Corin hit the dwarf? Why not just pull rank? Well, I'll offer something myself. I think, again, this is about God's good order. So Prince Corin uh, is also under authority. He can't just pull rank. He is under Prince Edmund, and as a result, he's under this dwarf, even though he outranks him. And I think this is a distinction that is Prince Rapidash is kind of a foil. He refuses order. He's an agent of chaos. So Corin too is a bit of an agent of chaos. To some degree, he's being disobedient, insubordinate. He's fighting against the authority that's over him. But he argues with it. He doesn't all out refuse it in the same way that Rapidash does. So there is a difference there, although Corin too needs some character development, right? But I think Lewis is pointing us to order. And again, the recognition that we are all under authority. And again, that we don't just belong to ourselves. And that's, we said it earlier, in our current climate and culture, that's not an idea that's easy to swallow, right? Well, we got 10 minutes and 3 chapters. We can do it. So we have the fight at Anvard. And honestly, there's not, in my mind, there's not a ton there. Again, we have Lewis talking about virtue. Shasta is terrified, and yet he forces himself to go into battle, even though he's unprepared. And so I think Lewis is saying again, courage is important, and it's a virtue. So we are to emulate Shasta. We then have Rapidash, whose pride becomes his downfall. So he jumps off of this high place in this dramatic fashion to make himself look impressive and fearsome and maybe cool. And he gets hooked up as a result. And everyone begins to laugh at him. We have issues of honor. So Rapidash says, Edmund, King Edmund, give me a sword and face me man on man, and I will show you I'm the better swordsman. Edmund's ready to do it, but King Loon says, actually, Rapidash, you've disqualified yourself from that. Had you have issued a grievance or a defiance, had you let us know you were coming to take issue, we would have met you militarily because that is within an honor code. But you have dishonorably attacked us. You're nothing but an assassin. So you think of samurai versus ninja, there's honor, and then there's the assassin. And there's a different set of rules for those different categories. We're working within this honorable context, and Rapidash has been dishonorable. And because he's been dishonorable, he does not get treated honorably, although he continues to be treated well and still honored as a prince. So it's a complicated system. It's not just easy or clear cut. So he doesn't get to, at this point in the story, he doesn't get to face Edmund or anybody else one-on-one, because he has not acted honorably. So he needs to be dealt with differently. That's why later they wish that they could just have some sort of a situation, or the battle that had happened, he would have just been killed there. Because now they have to deal with this person, and it makes it much more complicated than a simple one-on-one fight or him being killed during an attack like that. There's different rules. And again, that goes back to Lewis's mere Christianity. Not everything is good at all times. So there are goods. For Lewis, fighting for what's right can be honorable. Killing itself can be honorable under the right circumstances. Change the circumstances and it's no longer the right thing to do. Something else has to be done. So again, the sense that there's not some sort of a universal good or bad. One thing is not always good, nor is it always bad. It's often contextual. I think, again, that's important for us to remember. And then within that honor thing, there's this honor code, or the world of honorableness. There's this conversation about Prince Corin, and the king not giving him too hard a time for joining the fight. And in fact, the king is proud in appearance, even though in word he's chastising somewhat. And then Prince Darren says, you would be more angry if he was at the other end, if he was expressing cowardice rather than an overenthusiasm to fight, recklessness. And so again, the sense that there are some things closer to the good and some things further away. And that in itself tells us about the universe and what's behind it. So then Bree becomes a wiser horse. And we have Bree swearing by the lion, takes his oath by the lion, and yet it is revealed in this chapter that he does not believe Aslan is actually a lion. Why? Well, because that would make him a beast like us. So, anybody have any thoughts about that? Again, we have our parallel to the incarnation. Christ becomes a human. He's not just strong like a human or fierce like a human to his enemies.
Yeah, that's the way the Pharisees looked at it. Can't be a God. He's right here. We know who he is.
You know, his mom and dad, his brothers.
So it's certainly a parallel to that.
Yeah.
I had a question. How come Lewis brought King Edmund into this? Why did he? There has to be a reason why he didn't use Peter. He used Edmund. Did he want it to show the symbolism that Edmund isn't the Edmund he used to be? That he's different. He's growing. He's more mature. Is that sort of what he was trying to do, or what am I Am I?
Well, in some ways, Edmund was the Peter character, right? The apostle Peter, who is restored after his
Ah.
denial of Christ. And Peter becomes leader of the church in Acts, right? And he's commissioned. So I think
Well, we
to
brought
some,
Edmund, you know,
yeah, so I think to some degree, we have some of that going on. But we also have this moment in our last chapter, Rabbadash the Ridiculous, um, where Edmund talks about knowing another traitor who, when given the second chance, reformed. And so I think part of it is, Lord, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. If you do not forgive their trespasses, neither will you be forgiven. So this is, I think, a dynamic of grace. So we're still within this honor world, and within the honor world, mercy, not foolishness, not recklessness, wise reason, mercy has a place. And ultimately, I think Lewis doesn't want to make even the villain 100% villainous or irredeemable. Rabbadash, for his dastardliness, there is hope for him. And so because of that, again, we see an honorable discussion about how to deal with him. What are the conditions? What are the hope for? How will we reach that? And they really tried to, so pray for your enemy, bless them, don't curse, right? And so they are trying to bless Rabbadash, to not allow him to continue in his course, but at the same time, respect him as a prince, send him home with, you're gonna give us your word of honor that this isn't gonna happen again. And we expect you to be different. And so even in the way that Prince Loon schools Prince Corin, shame on you for mocking a man that is in a lesser position to you. If there's somebody is in a stronger position than you, yes, you can mock that person, but you don't mock those who are weaker than you. So we have these lessons in power. They're trying their best. They've treated him well. They've fed him. They've treated him better than he deserves. And yet he refuses to take it. He gibbers at them. He tries to curse them and frighten them. And then suddenly we have Aslan in the room. And he gives a warning. Now he gives warning in a way that these kings and queens cannot. And there's a certain irony here because Rabbadash is warning them. He's even trying to curse Aslan in the name of Tash, in the name of another god. He says that the bolt of Tash will fall. And so we have this pride and anger rears its head again. And he begins to, despite the warning, it's coming, Rabbadash, you're getting closer. It's now fallen. He has this moment of physical transformation, but he maintains the human voice for a moment and the human mind because he realizes what's happening, what he is becoming. So this draws on metamorphosis, which is part of the roots of the medieval literature that Lewis is drawing on. But how is becoming a donkey for Rabadash itself mercy? He's cried for mercy. Those who cry out to the Lord for mercy, will they receive it? I think yes. I think God is merciful in all of his acts. And so even here, where he's given warning, is a real intention to try and help Rabadash receive the grace that is being extended, and he won't do it. And so there's this moment of transformation. How is this mercy? How is this good for Rabadash?
It's humbling.
It's humbling. Why is that good?
Because when we're humbled, we have to take a greater look at who we are.
Right.
Maybe it's the antecedent to his pride.
Right. It's a cure.
Maybe.
At the
Mhm.
very least, in Rabadash's story, it seems to give some control. Rabadash cannot take being made a fool of, and he has had to make a fool of himself in front of his own people.
Mhm.
He's become this byword. But as a result, he becomes a more peaceful king, becomes a better neighbor,
Mhm.
because there's this ongoing threat of becoming an ass once again in the UK. That's not a swear word. Moms call their sons that all the time growing up, silly ass. But as a result, it keeps them on a short leash. So ultimately, it is grace for Rabadash, and that results in grace for Narnia and Arkenland.
In a way, the short leash is a gift, right? Like when you put boundaries in for
Right.
yourself for certain things,
Yes,
it's kind of going, well, yeah, I could do those things.
yes,
It's not good for me to do those
Yes.
things or whatever, right?
yes, yeah. And he has a long life and rulership as a result,
Mhm.
right? Because there's not that kind of competition and the murder that usually goes along with being Tisra.
Hmm.
So it has some direct benefits to him as well. Well, my friends, that was a horse and his boy. So next week, we are doing the first 17 chapters of the Screw Tape Letters. Letters between a junior and senior demon. And I love this book.
Do you guys have any extra of it in the
I might,
library?
let me check.
We have one.
Well, I'm just thinking one, but
I'm gonna stop the recording here and then we'll pray.